Do you want to travel more, but it just always seems like you don't have enough money to do so? Well, obviously that's a bit of a no-brainer. But for the last 2 years, I've been traveling non-stop. I gave up my apartment here in Toronto, Canada, and I've just been traveling around the world and been to 25 countries in the last 2 years. And throughout that journey, I think I've gotten a pretty good idea of where I see people spending money on things they don't need to, how I've managed to budget and really just always be traveling. Essentially every dollar I make, I spend on some form of travel. So in this video, I want to go through kind of the 5 things that are potentially holding you back from being able to travel, and my experience being as someone who's been from Croatia to France to Ireland to Argentina to Peru to Chile to Colombia to Mexico, all over the Caribbean, a lot of different places over the last few years, and this is kind of what I've learned along the way. So without further ado, let's get into the video. All right, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Alex, and this is the Lifting Nomad. If this is your first time seeing one of my videos, I'm someone who travels the world while staying in shape. So my content mostly reflects around travel, lifestyle, fitness, wellness, mental health, nutrition, that kind of stuff. If that sounds interesting, feel free to check out some of the other videos down below. But again, in this one, I want to talk about 5 reasons you potentially can't afford to travel. And before I start, I do want to make sure I'm being adamantly clear about the privilege I have as being someone born in Canada, making a decent living, and have the ability to travel. I realize this is not something that everyone in the world gets to do, and I'm extremely fortunate to be able to do so. And I'm also not ignorant to the fact that the economic status of lots of people in this country and lots of people kind of around the world right now. So I do want to just make it clear that this is just something that I enjoy and what I spend my money doing. This is not the expectation that everyone in the world should spend all of their money on travel. I really just don't buy anything else. This is what I spend my money on. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about number 1 reason you're not able to travel as much as you'd want, and that is gonna be you are not budgeting. Or you have a budget and you're just not sticking to it. A recent study showed that 70% of Americans admit that they have a monthly budget. Now, how often do you actually hear people sticking to it? I mean, me, even myself, have been guilty of having a budget, then I go get drunk off my tits and I end up just blowing through it on one weekend for the 2-week budget, and then I'm having to eat all my home-cooked meals and not being able to go out for another week and a half until the next paycheck comes around. So here's my first kind of advice. If you don't have a budget right now, or if you do have one and you're not sticking to it, open up a Google Sheets and start a monthly actual expenditure tracking of how much you're spending on what in different categories. So keep things like eating obviously, so that's groceries, eating out, subscriptions, car payments, rent, utilities, things like that. Like, just bucket them into their own categories just so you can get an actual grasp of how much money you're spending on things. If you're someone like me who actually like to go out a lot, that's usually my highest category. And obviously, once you've seen that, you should be prioritizing your debt way before you're even thinking about traveling. If you have any kind of credit card loans or anything like that, you should be paying that off immediately before you even consider trying to build a travel budget. Now, once you've got that figured out, it's important to set aside travel money. The reality is that someone like myself, and there's lots of people like digital nomads like this who are constantly traveling, you're almost always just monitoring flight prices for a discount or for something to go down, and then you purchase it and make your travel plans around those flights. So for instance, a really great example, I've recently been considering going to Scotland for Canada Day and July 4th, which is both in midweek this year, so essentially it's a free week for me. And I've been following flights from Toronto to Edinburgh, and this week they actually completely crashed, and I was able to get a flight one way from nonstop from Toronto to Scotland for like $300, which is normally like a $600 or $700 flight. But because I had those flight alerts on, I was able to get an email and be notified when I need to purchase that flight. And now I'm going to Scotland, so it's settled. My recommendation is generally to set aside a certain amount per month for vacations. If you are like a traditional family, let's say, who gets 2 one-week vacations every year, so every like 6 months or so, set aside that amount that you're going to have to pay originally. So if you find online that you're going to need $3,000 in 6 months to pay for the next vacation, start saving $3,000 divided by 6, $500 a month. That way that when that payment comes, you have that cash in an account and it's ready to go on your credit card once you actually make the purchase. All right, number 2 reason you probably can't afford to travel as much as you'd like to, it's gonna be you buy too much stuff. Now, I used to be a big culprit of this. Everything from like Amazon to subscription delivery boxes and like food boxes and all kinds of shit that I just never really ended up needing. And I was spending far too much money on. Now I've realized I can live a very minimalist lifestyle and I don't need all of the stuff that I had before. So I'll give you a perfect example. Right now I'm traveling again pretty much full time, and my wardrobe consists of a backpack, a personal item backpack, and a suitcase. Unfortunately, I am Canadian, so I do need a second suitcase that is full of my winter clothes with like boots and warmer jackets and toques and that kind of stuff. But otherwise, I would be able to just have that one suitcase and the backpack and my smaller backpack for all of my stuff. Like right now, I'm subletting all this furniture and everything you see behind you. This is not mine. I'm just renting this apartment for 6 months, then I'm moving out of here. You'd be amazed how little clothes you actually need, and how much stuff you actually need is almost always a waste. My mom is very, very bad for this. She has so much stuff in her garages that is never going to be touched, ultimately until the day comes that I'm gonna have to throw it out in 30 or 40 years, whenever that comes. But it's just, kind of is a habit that I noticed she does. So maybe it's something that I took to heart and decided I'm never gonna be like that. Now let's talk about Amazon a little bit. I know obviously Jeffy is a very tempting person to buy stuff off of. They have so much stuff, from like deals and shiny new electronics and toys and gizmos and gadgets. The average American admitted to spending $100 a month on Amazon. So obviously over a year, it's $1,200. But personally, in my experience from people who do use Amazon, it's either like once a month for very small purchases, or you go way overboard. So that average may not be actually indicative of how much the most people are spending on Amazon. It could just be because most people only spend like 10 or 20 bucks, and that's the data they pulled. My advice, just delete the app. There's really no reason for you to have it. If you do need something, go online and purchase it once. Don't do like reorders, stuff like that. It just ends up piling up, and then you have this bulk surplus of stuff that you don't really need. And speaking of that, like bulk discounts, I know it can be tempting to go into like Costco and buy 6 years worth of laundry detergent and 3,000 rolls of paper towel and all this stuff. But it ends up being just a really heavy expense that you might not even end up needing if you decide to move houses, or water damage, or mice get into it, or something that could ruin the product. So I recommend maybe like 6 months in advance for bulk, but there's no need to save for like 5 to 10 years in the future. All right, number 3 reason. This is gonna be a hot one. You eat or drink out too much. This was by far what happened to me in the past when I had no money and no control over my finances. I was eating and drinking out like crazy. I would be spending like $200-300 a night out, going to bars in Toronto, doing that like 2 or 3 times a week. Then at the end of the month, I'd have credit card bills like, $2,000 worth of just meaningless alcohol in bars. And I'm not alone. Lots of my friends were doing it too, and it seemed like so natural and so normal at the time. And then in hindsight, I obviously had some great memories and some great experiences, but now I just prefer to spend that money on some more important things that are more valuable to me in this point in my life. That's not even including things like Uber Eats, drunk food, buying too much food at the grocery store that you end up just throwing out because it's just food waste. So like typically what I try and do is go to the grocery store twice a week, and I buy the next 3 or 4 days in advance. Then I'll go back again and buy the next 3 or 4 days in advance, and I'll just buy exactly what I need in that moment. I try to stick to like the outside rows of the grocery store. These tend to be things that are cheaper and they make less profit on. Most people, spend a lot of their money in the middle, which is where you kind of get rinsed. But if you're just buying like, fruit from fruit stands and vegetables from the grocery store and decent cuts of meat, you don't really end up spending that much money. Like right now, my budget is $250 every 2 weeks for food. That's including any eating out I do and my groceries, which for some people I realize is a little bit high. I prefer to just have $500 a month for food. I think it lets me eat healthy, eats a lot of high protein foods, and kind of just keeps me happy, feeling good. So that's what I spend my money on. But keep in mind that $500, the majority of that is eating at home. I highly recommend at least cooking 80% of your meals at home. It's just gonna let you save so much more money. It's so much more satisfying also to cook your own food. So, don't sleep on that. And, just to finish that off, if you are going out, try and only go out like once a week. That's what I tend to do now. And then additionally to that, if you are someone who drinks alcohol and you like going out to drink, very common thing in major cities, I typically try to drink at home or at my friends' houses before we get to the bars. That way I can save quite a lot of money. Like a round of drinks right now, at least in Toronto, is like $50 to $100 depending on where you are. versus I can just get like a bottle of wine or like a 6 or 12 pack and drink that, and it costs like 20, 25 bucks, and drink it at a friend's house beforehand. All right, number 4, and this may be a little bit spicy and a bit controversial again, and this is just my opinion. Again, you know, I'm not taking this from anyone, and if this is something that brings you joy, then by all means do it. But for someone like me who wants to travel all the time and spend my money just on travel, this is what it is. Number 4, you are spending too much money on concerts, shows, or sports. Personally, I cannot think of a bigger waste of money than going to a concert. Now, I'm obviously gonna get a little flack for that. People love going to concerts, people love watching live music, I get it. But for reference, like, you know, you can go to a Taylor Swift concert, the tickets were in Toronto were like $400 or $500, or you can buy a plane ticket to Lisbon, Portugal for $400 or $500. A 4-hour show or a flight to a foreign country. Or another example, right now, like Maple Leafs tickets on average are about $300. That's to see the NHL. That's like a week worth of a hostel in Lisbon. So now for that same price, instead of going to a concert and a Leafs game, I've gone to Lisbon and I've stayed in a hostel for a week. Like for me, the decision is just a no-brainer. I think for the time you're there versus the price you're paying, it is just never going to be worth it to me. Sure, there's lots of cheaper concerts you can go to. Like I think my sister went to Blink-182 for like 60 bucks or 50 bucks, something like that, for like an outdoor concert. Sure, that's totally worth it. I just think once you're getting it to the high hundreds, the thousands for a sporting event or a concert that only lasts a few hours, I just don't think it's ever going to be worth it. And like the experience of that is so short-lived that I just don't really see the ROI. And ultimately, you're kind of just surrounded by people in a crowd with their phones out. Maybe you can't see the whole thing. Like, I don't know. I've only been to one concert in my adult life, and it was just not worth it to me at all, and I just would never do it again. If anything, you know, I went to Pixar in concert in Buenos Aires this winter, which cost me, I want to say, like $35, and that was an incredible performance of like a live orchestra while we watched some of the Pixar movies. That was that was incredible, and it was a really beautiful moment and a beautiful thing for me to experience. I wouldn't have done that for $200. All right, the last thing, and number 5 for the reasons potentially holding you back from traveling as much as you want to, your bills are too high. Now, there's a lot of different things, obviously, that goes into bills, but a couple things that I do and how I've cut back on my expenses, things like memberships or subscriptions, I've pretty much cut down to just my essentials, like my phone bill. I have a couple different ones that I use for YouTube that I just are a part of the cost of doing business, let's say. But like a gym membership, people pay for like Equinox or these crazy expensive gyms for like $300 or $400 a month. A lot of people don't even end up going at that price. Versus you can go to a lot of these local smaller chains for like I think I'm paying Good Life maybe $45 a month right now. And for me, that's just always going to be a better deal than, you know, spending so much more money, 5, 6, 7 times more money to go to a gym that is essentially the same thing. In my mind, as long as you have a barbell, a squat rack, bench presses, and dumbbells, maybe some machines, you can get jacked doing that. You don't really need much more fancy equipment than that. And I know some people really take pride in their group classes and having these fancy gyms and having, you know, all this and that. But for me, if I do want to travel, that's just something I have to sacrifice. A couple other things, like obviously hydro bills are really, really high these days. Doing things like laundry at night, or maybe lowering your heat and wearing more layers when you're inside. I see like so many brand new cars here in Toronto of like Mercedes G-Wagons and BMW M4s and all these crazy vehicles that cost an insane amount, and they depreciate 10% as soon as you drive off the lot. In my mind, if you live in a major city that is walkable, there's no reason for you to own a car. It is just a pure net negative in almost every single element. I haven't had a car since high school, like 10 years ago, and I've been completely fine because I travel so much. So that's going to be the video, and I know there's going to be, you know, a little bit of maybe give and take on some of these topics and some of the views that people have, and that's totally fair. This is just my opinion and some of the things that I've noticed that I have corrected or adjusted or fixed so I am able to travel full time and enjoy this part of my life. So hopefully this video was useful. If it was, feel free to leave a like or comment in the section below. Always helps the algorithm. As always, my name's Alex. Welcome back to Lifting Nomad. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.